welcome to Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. If you're someone who enjoys a bit of rock music and you haven't found yourself listening to Kingswood at least some point over the last decade or so, then you need to change that immediately. Formed in Melbourne around the late 2000s, Kingswood wasted no time in letting their music get heard by the world. Following a self-titled EP in 2010 and their Change of Heart EP in 2012, a competition run by Triple J Unearthed to play the iconic Splendour In The Grass festival shot the band to wider fame that very same year. In 2014, they released their first album, Microscopic Wars. An ambitious undertaking for a debut, the record was made in Nashville with six-time Grammy Award-winning record producer, engineer and mixer Vance Powell. The record was a huge hit, hitting number 6 on the Australian charts, boasting a handful of singles, and even being nominated for Best Rock Album at the 2014 ARIA Awards. Personally, I find it hard to go past I Can Feel That You Don't Love Me without being transported back to that bygone era. Since then, Kingswood have been unleashing amazing tunes at every turn, with records like 2017's After Hours Close to Dawn, 2020's Juveniles, and 2023's Home showing the depth of their musical talents. Now, a decade on from their debut, Kingswood are taking a look back at that first record and hitting the road in celebration of its 10th anniversary. The tour kicks off on August 2nd, that's tonight if you're listening to this as it goes live, with a hometown show in Melbourne before they head off around the rest of the country. The tour sees them playing the album in full along with a handful of other heavier classics. Put simply, if you like Kingswood's earliest material, you do well to catch them on this tour. Ahead of their shows, I was lucky enough to join Kingswood in their Melbourne studio for a chat. Due to the casual nature of the conversation, you'll hear a little bit of rustling and moving around on couches from time to time, but that's just the name of the game. Anyway, revisit Kingswood's debut album, Microscopic Wars, and once you're done giving that a spin, have a listen to our chat, grab a ticket to their tour, I'll see you at the Melbourne show, and then I'll see you again at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. Alex Laska and Fergus Linacre, thank you for joining the Trusty Chords podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure, Tyler. Thank you for having us.
So for those who don't recognise your names, could you guys give me a very brief intro on who you both are and why we're talking today?
I'm Fergus. This is Alexander.
Why are we talking? It's an interesting question.
Very existential.
We're from the band Kingswood.
I don't know, why does anyone talk?
Just to get to know us a bit better.
I suppose to get to know us a bit
To shine
better.
a light on our lives in focused on the music industry.
Maybe to get insight into our harmonic intention. Trusty chords. See what I did there?
Yeah.
See what
We
I
could
did there,
focus
Tyler?
purely on harmony.
Harmonic intentions. Harmonic resonance.
Harmony between the crew on the bus.
Harmony between two notes.
Harmony between you and your family.
Harmony between you and the ground below you.
And whatever God you believe in,
That's
if
right.
you do.
If you do.
I like the answer. We're from the band Kingswood. That really that one helps. So obviously, Kingswood are a band I've really loved probably since I'd love to say it was the first EP back in 2010, but it was probably closer to the first album. Actually, no, I think it would have been when like She's My Baby came out.
Yeah.
So I think 2012 or something.
12-ish,
like yeah. So because I think that and Medusa might have come around the same time.
Yeah,
and
very
it was on
close
Triple
to each
J.
other.
So
Yeah.
that's my backstory. So I guess if anyone doing math, Kingswood have been around for quite a few years.
A century.
Yeah.
We're like the twilight of bands. We're vampiric.
Yeah.
Kingswood are
last this
eternal. Kingswood are eternal. They've always existed.
We're
They always
in the
will.
hundreds of decades now. We've transitioned from baroque and romantic to stoner.
Yeah.
Stoner and country.
Yeah. We actually came to Australia by land.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a very nice segue to what I like to start with here, because I like to go back to the beginning with things. So I like to sort of ask you both: do you guys have any particular memories of when music first resonated with you?
Yep. It's pretty easy for me. It was a very musical family. My youngest memories is like singing Les Mis around the kitchen with Mum and my brothers. I remember I used to go to Dad's place on a Thursday. Parents were split up at this stage, and I'd get there before anyone else, and I'd put headphones on and put on the Magical Mystery Tour on record.
What was that? The one with like little storybook in there as well?
Yeah. And lie down and just listen to that, which now seems like a wild thing for a 10-year-old to do.
Yeah, that is also very cool.
So yeah, I think that's probably shines a light on that I kind of fell in love with music at that age. We were in a band at that age as well. When we were in grade 5 and grade 6.
Yeah, grade 6 we were. Short-lived.
Yeah.
Short-lived.
But you also had a very, very musical upbringing.
I did. I had a very informative and educational musical upbringing, but probably less. I don't think my family were musical. They were just into music a lot and put my sister and I into tuition from a very young age in piano, and I did clarinet and she did flute. So we were constantly under the guidance of various Russian women.
So basically, music was always going to be, you know...
Well, yeah, I don't know. I suppose my sister still plays music. She's a doctor, but I sort of just focused primarily on the musical side. I was obsessed from a very young age with it. Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously, Ferg, you mentioned like the Beatles, but Alex, do you remember any sort of artists you were listening to around sort of those young ages?
Like Shostakovich and Chopin and Beethoven.
All the top 40.
Ode to Joy was like probably the first thing I ever learnt.
And then jazz.
And then jazz when I turned 16, got into jazz. And
then, correct me if I'm wrong, at 17 it was Hendrix and Page.
Yeah, it was later.
It was
later. And I remember, I might have even come to you, but I remember going around to people being like, man, have you heard of this guy, Jimi Hendrix? And everyone was just like, what's wrong with you? Like, where have you been? It's like, oh, yeah. And then Led Zeppelin. Someone gave me a Led Zeppelin DVD as a gift, and I thought they were a heavy metal band, so I just put it on a shelf for years. I was like, I'm not into that.
I mean, it's a little bit heavy compared to Shostakovich and...
Yeah. Well, in a way, maybe not. Depends if you... Yeah, in a way. And then Led Zeppelin ended up being probably my favourite band.
You went and saw them, right?
Yeah, I flew to London.
The last show.
For their reunion.
Oh, the 2007 one it would have been.
Yeah, 2009 was the reunion. The O2 Arena.
Yeah.
I became obsessed with Led Zeppelin.
I mean, that's a pretty, pretty fancy thing to put on the old, concert-going resume alone.
That was pretty good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So then, obviously, Alex, I'll stick with you. So you had a very sort of, I guess, varied and storied sort of musical upbringing. But how did, so obviously you're very well known for guitar. So how did guitar sort of make itself apparent to you? I mean, you mentioned artists like, Jimmy Page and Jimi Hendrix.
I got to experience the guitar through all of these people, and obviously younger days as well. Like Ferg was playing guitar in the band that we were in, but I was never. My parents were obviously putting money and tuition into piano and other stuff, and they were like, "Yeah, guitar's great," but, and not that I wasn't allowed to play it. They're like, "What do you do? Like, guitar's not you're practicing piano and clarinet, saxophone, and all this other stuff." And then I studied at the VCA. I did a piano degree, and then when I finished that, I decided I should start playing guitar. And then I called Ferg, and I was like, "Hey man, you want to start a band?" And he was like, "Yeah." And then he was like, "What are you gonna play?" And I was like, "Guitar." And he's like, "You don't play guitar." And I'm like, "I know." He's like, "What am I gonna do?" He's like, "You're gonna sing." And he's like, "But I don't sing." And I'm like, "Yeah, you do."
You do now.
And the rest is history.
He kind of saw that I could sing before I knew it, because I'd do harmonies and I sang a couple of things and he heard me, so...
I always had this thing from literally from when Ferg was 12, when we were in that band. I was like, man, Ferg can sing. Like I was always like, he's such a good singer. I always had this thing in my mind.
I had this memory that, I don't know if it's one of those adjusted memories over time, but it was like us in a rehearsal room and you being like, let's do Jailbreak or something that. And me being like, I can't sing that. And you're like, just trust me, do it. I know you can.
Yeah.
Something like that.
No, that's 100% the truth.
Yeah.
And you were like, but what do you mean? I'm like,
just do it.
Like yell. You got to kind of yell like in tune. And then he did it and everyone was like, whoa.
Yeah, it was like I did it and was like, oh, I can sing like this.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, that's very good, because that was my next question. How did singing sort of make itself,
Well, yeah, it was like I grew up on Aerosmith, Queen, Zeppelin, Chisel,
Ferg's mom's a great singer, and his brother Ed. It's like it's in the genes.
Yeah, and Craig as well was a great singer.
Yeah.
And so it was just a very sing along at Christmas. Still now, at one point of the night, everyone gets guitars out, and everyone sings songs, and even the young cousins now sing songs. And
Charles got a good voice.
Yeah, he's got a great voice. Yeah, he's awesome.
It's in their genes. They got it.
But I was always like in the background, because my two big brothers were sort of the big loud characters, and I'd sort of sit back and do harmonies or maybe sing a song until it was
Until Ferg became
Until it was
the
my
loudest.
Yeah, right. Until you were basically the frontman of the family band, so to speak.
That's it.
That's
Yeah,
it.
right.
And now I just go suffer. Look who's singing now.
So you guys obviously mentioned you're playing music together quite young. So I'm assuming that you guys met in school then? Is that how it worked out? Primary school. So then you mentioned this band before when you were about 12 or something. I should ask, what was this band called? Because usually those early band
Sweet
names...
Garlic.
Sweet Garlic.
I was going to say, usually those early bands have terrible names.
I think it's a pretty good name.
Well, I didn't say it was terrible. I'm not going to pass judgment.
Not a bad little
I mean,
name.
it's far better than the name of a band I had in high school. And then...
Which was?
Or it was named after a pulp song called This Is Hardcore.
I like that. That's a cool name.
The idea being that we were nowhere close to hardcore.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
absolutely sucked.
I like that.
However,
Well, we thought
that
Sweet-
band, I should say, that band never got off the ground because our other guitarist, he heard someone laughing at the name and he quit before we
He
played.
was
it.
never going to take it. He was never going to cop
He
it,
wasn't
was
going
he?
to take
He
it.
wasn't a musician.
Yeah.
No. Well, we thought Sweet Garlic was clever because garlic's not sweet, but then we didn't realise that when you cook garlic in the oven, it becomes sweet. So it was just a stupid thing altogether.
I mean,
It was like, was it like for some reason, Rolling Stones kept being a reference at the time. You know, like Rolling Stones, because they're not always round. So sometimes they don't roll. Like garlic, it's
Yeah.
not always sweet.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's like clearly a lot of thought went into it.
heaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, I mean, how did that evolve into you guys playing as part of Kingswood? Like, were there any other bands in between, or how did that sort of work?
I was in different sort of punk style bands at school. Me and Justin, the original drummer, were in a band.
I should say, when you say like punk, what sort of like era of punk?
Friends
are you
Will
talking?
Roam.
Okay, that sort of punk.
Blink 182.
Yeah.
We opened for Body Jar and played at a Rocker Stedford at Vodafone Arena, and it was just a school band.
What was the name of that one?
Another Conundrum.
Another Conundrum, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great name for a band.
You reckon?
Yeah.
I mean, I
For a punk band, for sure.
could see that on a lineup with Body Jar on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Friends will roam another Conundrum Body Jar.
Yeah.
It's cool.
For
Good
amusement
name.
only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some 41. Yeah.
Yeah, $1 short bands. Like
$1
Yeah,
short. Yeah.
yeah,
100% that
yeah,
era. Yeah.
$3 down.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, but I think without Al pushing me, I don't think I ever had like the real belief that it was a thing. I was like, I like music, I like being in bands, but I don't think at that time in my life I was gonna like take the leap.
Yeah, right.
Al kind of dragged me and was like, "You're in my band now. We're doing this."
I let him down the garden path.
Yeah,
Here we are.
yeah.
So obviously, Al, you were the one who actually was, like, I guess, the driving force.
Oh, I sort of started because of the jazz sort of the tangent and becoming a sort of functional working musician quite young. I was doing like a lot of like residencies and weddings and functions and like kind of like function band stuff as a keys player from the age of 16 onwards. So I was like, oh yeah, working in music is the thing, but I didn't have a capacity or an understanding of making original. Like I thought I was going to be like a session guy. I even going to the VCA was like coming out as like a pianist and doing session stuff and whatever and playing in bands and being a gun for hire. And then I was like, oh, hang on a second, that kind of, I don't know if it's going to satisfy like my creative urges and not to mention like being exposed to contemporary music and seeing how that was transpiring and then knowing that's kind of more the world that Ferg came from. So it was the two worlds kind of colliding that made sense. Because I was like, you can be functional, whatever. And he's like, well, we're not going to go play people's weddings. I'm like, yeah, actually, yeah, we should write stuff, you know?
But he rocked up at my door and gave me a CD of originals he'd written and recorded and a booklet of lyrics and was like, we've got rehearsal in next week.
Yeah, right.
Learn them.
And I'd booked a show at the Ding Dong Lounge.
So had that sort of push and never come along, like, would you be in?
It's hard to know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Similarly, I did a commerce degree and I could have been like, Ferg, do you want to be in a band? Nah. Okay, cool. I'm going to go do commerce.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of someone who failed out of a commerce degree, yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
it's hard to know. It was always in me. Maybe there would have been another avenue at some point, but I don't think I was individually very driven to make that my life at that stage.
So then I should say, well, where did the name Kingswood come from for you guys?
Oh,
Or how did that name get chosen?
it's not a great question because there's not a great answer.
No, it depends
There's fake
on which,
answers.
Depends on which answer we wanted to reveal. The one that we were all conceived in at Kingswood. The original members, which is one that we can leave out there for people to make an assessment on its validity.
I remember we had to change our name very quickly before a gig because the band name that we had, we realised was taken in America.
What was that?
And so it was,
The Service,
The
wasn't it?
Service, which is a terrible band name.
I mean, you know, it's one of those the band names from the thousands, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And so I remember there was a whiteboard and we were all standing around and there was 10 names on the board and...
I don't even remember who put it up there.
It was Mango.
Was it Mango?
Yeah, I think so.
I do know. Vasco Era.
Their song Kingswood.
Yeah, that's why he put it up.
Great. They were a great band.
They were.
Yeah.
See, I was always either thinking you guys were, you know, fans of the car, fans of the Vasco era, or you just loved Kingswood country, which
All three.
All three sound
three.
fine. Yeah.
Also, it's just it has a great Aussie iconic appeal, but it actually has great universal appeal.
It does. Yeah.
Feels like
It's
an
a strong
international
word.
band.
It does.
Lord Kingswood.
Yeah.
The Kingswood Kids.
Kingswood Kids. And I sing about Fords a lot, so it makes sense.
You do.
So,
I
Alex,
do love Ford.
He's got a new song on the new record that's devoted to his
my
pickup
truck.
truck that lives in Nashville.
that's where I look up on the board and say, all right.
Yeah.
So, Alex, I spoke to you a couple of months ago about, you know, some of the hopes and the dreams that Kingswood had when the band first started.
Yeah.
But when you guys first kicked off, what were you sort of hoping to achieve? Well, I should say, was there any sound you guys were hoping to actually...
We just wanted a show. We just wanted to play a show somewhere. That was as far as it went.
I think our first set was like half originals, half Quatsa, Zeppelin and Chisel covers. Something like that. AC/DC maybe.
It was just AC/DC Chisel and maybe 2 of our own songs.
It's a very diverse
Yeah.
mix of... I mean, especially doing, you know, Queens and...
No, and we did Billy Thorpe. We used to do Billy Thorpe and the
Oh,
Aztecs.
come on, everybody, take a lip with me.
Down to New Orleans. No, it's down to New Orleans.
New Orleans. I think that's what it's called.
And we do digga 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 digga.
She
Van
just jumped on
Morrison.
a plane and
No.
Van Morrison.
Yeah, he does a version of it. Going down to New Orleans. Oh no, that Billy Thorpe does a version of that, but it's a Van Morrison tune.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe Van Morrison covers it as well.
Is that Baby Please Don't Go?
But please don't go.
I think AC/DC did that in their, like, one of their early singles as well.
Did they?
I think when they used to have, I'm forgetting his name, so I might have to edit the name in afterwards so I sound smarter. Their first singer before Bon.
Before
Scott.
Bond, that's right. Yeah.
I keep wanting to say Dave Evans.
And Aerosmith also do a cover of it on Honkin' on Bobo. Baby, please don't go. Yeah, but I'm sure I've seen a version where Bond sings it too.
They probably kept on going.
Yeah,
But I think when it was released as a single, he
Right.
wasn't on it.
I've lost all memory of that.
Yeah, we did that. Baby, please don't go. No, he's gonna love you. Oh,
So
baby,
obviously
please
there's
don't
like a very bluesy sort of hard rock.
There was a lot of blues, a
Yeah.
lot of hard rock.
Yeah, we do some B.B. King and
Red House would do. Jimi
Red
Hendrix.
House. We still throw that in every now and then.
We'd do some Zeppelin.
Right. So that's sort of, I guess, more of some of the influences and everything. So you're saying you was hoping for a show. I mean, how quickly did you sort of realize, you know what, we can actually get more than just a show. We can probably get a few shows out of this.
Well,
and
it was
keep
like,
going.
I remember we got a show and then we were like, oh, and then a bunch of people put us in touch with other people who thought that we were good, which we weren't, but we definitely had potential. And then it got more shows and then we were like, oh, maybe we could do bigger shows and maybe they might give us some beer. It's just like really incremental, small steps.
I mean, you know, hungry young musicians, or thirsty young musicians in this case.
Yeah, exactly.
Just, you know, just hoping for something.
Just hoping for the reality of musicianship being
Yeah.
like, being
And then you-
available.
You get to the point where someone wants you to open for them, which was actually Vasco Era was our first tour.
Yeah, right.
Was that our first opening? Yeah, it was Vasco.
Yeah,
Phillip
Ballarat,
Island.
Bendigo. No, Ballarat, Phillip Island, Melbourne.
Yeah.
And then on from there until, the first thing that really changed everything was the Splendour Unearthed spot.
Yeah. So
That shifted everything.
when was
Did
that?
we have our album out by then?
No.
No.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would have been about 2012 or something.
That was 2012.
2012, yeah.
Yeah, and the album's 2014. So
Yeah.
that, I guess, goes into my next question of, so that first album was Microscopic Wars, so that was out in 2014. And, I mean, recording an album like that as your debut album out in Nashville, bit of a huge moment for any artist. So this is something we chatted about a little while ago. But how did that sort of opportunity come about for you guys to actually record an album in Nashville? Have a Melbourne band who hadn't released a full length go and record an album in Nashville and record a pretty good album while you're there.
It does sound a bit crazy.
There was a weird. I think I told you this, Tyler, in our phone conversation. There was a weird serendipitous link. There was a guy named John, I'm pretty sure his name was John Siddle, at BMG Chrysalis. That's all I remember. John Siddle at BMG Chrysalis, this guy in America who somehow got a copy of the EP that you were talking about, Change of Heart EP, and really liked it. And passed it on to Vance Powell, who ended up engineering and mixing and producing the first record, or like co-producing the first record. And at the same time, Blunderbuss had become an album that we all loved and we talked about. I particularly loved it, Jack White's Blunderbuss. And the way they recorded it, and it was all the tape and it's like vinyl resurgence and all this sort of thing. And we'd had a conversation of like, if we could get someone to produce the album, who we'd do, and like Vance Powell was on the list. And at the same time, we got an email from Vance being like, "We've got this EP from this guy John. If you're ever interested in making an album, I'd be into it." And it was one of those like, we have to do this. Yeah. The guy that we're talking about has emailed us. What are the chances?
Yeah. So we just worked our asses off and begged, borrowed, and stole, and got ourselves there.
Yeah, right. So I mean, for a band like you guys to actually be recording in Nashville, what was that like? That must have been a little bit surreal, right?
It was one of the best times of my life.
Is it still the best recording experience? It has to be because it's your first album.
Yeah.
In Nashville, at the best studio in the world.
Yeah. And we got delayed by a week or two when we got there, so...
Vance was recording something else that was paying higher because he did us in India, even though it was still fucking expensive. But...
we loved it. It was also at a time when being an Aussie in Nashville was something of interest.
Rare. Yeah.
Now no one gives a fuck, but back then it was like, oh my god, you're Aussie?
Well, I mean, Aussies in Nashville now, they're a dime a dozen, aren't
they?
Yeah. Everyone's a show. Pretty much everyone's an Aussie there. But also Nashville was a population of 200,000 people. We didn't have any money because we'd spent it all on the album, so we bought bikes from Walmart that we would ride around the whole town of Nashville on to get anywhere. If you did that now, you would be flattened in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
And by someone who is oblivious. They wouldn't even know that they've done it.
Yeah.
There are 2 million people there now, over 2 million people. So in 10 years, just over 10 years, it's grown 10 times.
Yeah, we'd ride our bikes to the studio, which was about a 20-minute ride. Then we'd ride back into town and go out. We'd work for 12 hours in the studio, then we'd go out for 3 or 4 hours or something.
Yeah, if not more. Ride the bikes.
Then ride home, then back and go back every day for like 3 weeks.
I mean, just being in sort of those musical cities, there's so much to explore. I mean, I've never been to Nashville, although this time last month I was in Memphis.
Oh, yeah.
And, same state and everything. So very storied musical city. So, I mean, there's just, you're almost like kids in candy stores, aren't you? Just sort of in these areas making music and...
It was wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a complete change of scene and the people we met and the studio that we were in. It was incredible. They didn't tell us until a few days later, but we were making so much noise in this very famous studio, Blackbird, that it was bleeding into one of the mixing rooms.
You're right.
So they came in the middle of the night and pumped insulation in between the cavities between the 2 rooms. And then he told us the other day, he was like, they were in here last night, like filling up the cavities with foam because you guys were too loud and it was getting complaints.
So was there a specific moment while making that record you guys sort of realised, I think we're doing something pretty special here?
No.
Just business as usual, yeah?
There's no way you're aware of those things. There's no way. You never do. It's sort of just expressing and you're creating and you're trying to capture the moment to the best of everyone's collective ability at the time. Engineers and producers and us included, performance-wise and all that stuff. And because you're too present to be able to have an objective assessment of whether you think it's going to be meaningful or valuable culturally or socially. You know what I mean? It's like it's too. It's like us having this conversation and you deciding, Tyler, that at this particular point in the podcast that in history people will review this part of the conversation as poignant, and it will be talked about. No one ever, you just don't have the capacity to think that way.
Yeah.
Of course.
I don't remember ever thinking, oh, this song's going to be a hit, which I do now. Now I think we can assess them and be like, even though you never know, but you can be like, oh, I think this one's got legs, or
you can tell it's got that sort of that
I can
quality.
see, yeah. Because we're more educated about everything. But at the time, I don't remember ever having those feelings.
No, and also now
I think we did think we were going to win a Grammy.
No, it's just something stupid we would say. But now that you have a wealth of influence and retrospect that you use to measure against, whereas when you're starting out, there's nothing.
Yeah.
You have your aspirations and your idols, and your ability as to like work out how close you can get to either of those things.
Because the reason I asked that is because, I mean, were you guys surprised by the reaction that the record got when it came out? Because obviously,
definitely.
If you're making it, then you're very much in the weeds. You can't objectively say whether or not, or what the reaction.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
I'm shocked even now.
Yeah.
That it did that it's that people enjoyed it as much as they did.
Yeah, we're doing this 10-year anniversary tour, which was put to us.
You're right.
Right? They were like, you guys need to do this, and we were like, oh really? Do you think?
We're like, who's going to come out with that?
People really? It's 10 years ago, but the response has been amazing. So
because I mean, looking at the some of the accolades for it, I mean, it was like number 6 on the ARIA charts. It was nominated for an ARIA, and all that. And I mean, that's for a debut album, that's pretty impressive.
In a time where streaming didn't exist.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it sold a lot of copies in the pre-sale and the week of. I think it did something like 14,000 copies in that, which is like ridiculous, and it was still only number 6. Yeah. Now, if you did 14,000, you'd be like number 1. But you could divide it by 3 and stay number 1 for like 4 weeks.
Well, I mean, one thing that one thing I do in the second half of the year is lecturing at the Box Hill Institute, and I was actually telling my students a while ago about I think it was in 2010 or something like that. The band Bring Me the Horizon got number 1 on the charts. Yeah. And they set a record for the lowest amount of copies sold to get to number 1. I think it was like 300 or something.
Yeah, right.
And if you think of it like that, you just sort of like 14,000 and it only got number 6.
Yeah,
it must have been a big week for
I remember
Taylor Swift of the world.
Yeah, it was like Adele was out, Sheeran was out, and they were touring.
Yeah, that's right.
There was something else.
Swift.
There was like all the big names were in there.
And then there's Kingswood.
And then there was Kingswood. Yeah. We could probably go and investigate it, but it did a lot. It did a lot of. And Triple M had gotten on board at that stage, so it sort of had commercial. And Triple M had a lot of power at the time. Not that they don't now, but radio generally is obviously with the invention of streaming and subscription services and autonomy and all that sort of stuff. Like, we're very much kids of the radio generation, so I still love engagement with radio, but a lot of people like I write or produce for her in the younger demographic. They don't have a car to access radio or see the function of it. Like, it makes you feel connected to something, doesn't it?
I'm still someone who loves like the physical media, whether it be CDs or like cassettes or something like that.
Yeah, 100%.
And I mean, to me, it's amazing that cars don't come with CD players anymore.
Yeah.
And to think though that if they don't have cars, then they don't have radios. Like, what are they connected to apart from Spotify? And that boggles my mind.
It is wild.
Yeah. So obviously we touched on it before, you guys are going out on tour to perform the album in full and everything. So obviously we also sort of touched on it before, you probably wouldn't have thought you'd be doing this tour 10 years after the album. So 10 years after the album was released, I should say. So how do you guys sort of make this tour, I guess, special for both fans and yourself? Because it's a big, try to think of the word. It's a big honour, I guess, to sort of go on such a tour, play an album in full. Yeah,
it is, and the response has been great, and I think that we're a band that has been very diverse. Every album's different. We're not the AC/DC model where we go with whatever our influences are at the time, and we're no interest in just rinse and repeating, who we are. It's not a business for us. We're very sort of artistically driven. And
it's definitely a business.
It's a business. But
it is, art is definitely the prime mover.
Yeah, so when it comes to, it's like, how Silverchair has their frog stompers, like we have those as well. We have the people that love the early heavy stuff, but think some of the later stuff is, you know, not up their vibe, and we're actually leaning in and honouring the frog stompers that we have, and
The micro warriors, if you will.
the micro warriors.
That's great. I like that.
that's
The
good.
micro
We use that.
warriors. Oh, we should put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Too late now. So we're gonna,
It's always time.
we're gonna
It's
play,
always time.
yeah,
Anniversary.
we're gonna play the album in full. We're gonna play other sort of heavy stuff from that era. We're not gonna play anything new or soft. No Big City, no Golden.
So where are you
No
drawing?
offense.
Oh, undertaking.
Where are you drawing the line then? It was like
It's a tough one to
2017,
draw.
20
We've been debating it.
I think 2019 we're going to throw in some heavy stuff. Everything that's got sort of comprises the right attitude.
A couple of juveniles.
Yeah. That was 2019.
Because obviously it must be hard to curate a set list like that when you obviously want to be honouring, you know, the early stuff. But there's been so much evolution for you guys over the
Yeah,
years.
yeah. Just all heavy stuff.
Yeah, it's just nothing but, you know, ripping off Led Zeppelin for
Yeah, yeah.
for an hour.
That's it.
The other thing is we never had the opportunity to perform the album in full. Well, not actually, that's incorrect. We always had the opportunity. We just never did. So honouring it in a sense of presenting it in its complete form is something I'm looking forward to, for me.
Yeah.
Mm.
So
and reliving it sort of in the way that we designed it.
So actually, I guess revisiting the album for this tour. I mean, I'm assuming that there's a lot of songs you guys haven't played for quite a while,
Or
ever I think
some
in
of
some
them?
cases.
No, I think we've played everything at one point.
Yeah, I think so. The least played one would be Tremor, I reckon.
Yeah. But
But
I
we
think
did
it
it, we
was
did it.
definitely played.
So then, in the preparation for this, you know, I'm assuming you guys have done some preparation already.
Yep, some.
I'm assuming it's not like the night before you just whip the album on.
You'd
saying,
be
I think I remember.
surprised.
Yeah.
Harley,
Yeah,
you'd be
well,
surprised.
I'm trying to make you guys sound good.
Yeah.
But I mean, how does that sort of go for you guys to actually rediscover some of these songs?
Some of the stuff's more like some of the stuff. Look, Fergus and I were joking about this the other day. Some of the stuff lyrically is like, what planet was I on, particularly for my contributions? But secondly, I'm also impressed by some things. I'm like, wow,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
actually pretty cool.
Sort of wish you could tap into that youthful sort of creativity, right?
Yeah.
Sort of
Yeah.
I spoke to Al the other day and I was just like, this lyric in this song is all too much. I don't mind if anyone hears it. I was just like, what does this verse even mean?
I don't know.
Tell me where you died? Or something like
Show me how you die.
Show me how you died. Like, what are you talking about?
There's a lot of vampiric reference on this album.
Yeah. There's a lot of blood.
A lot of visceral,
Yeah.
reference.
I mean, the album's called Microscopic Wars. I mean, you expect a little bit of, you know,
Yeah,
bit of rough
exactly.
and tumble in there. You know?
Yeah. No, it's nice to revisit your creative former self and be forgiving but critical.
That's fair. Because I listened to the album actually again today, just in preparation for this, and but I decided to listen to the album and then go to the most recent record and just see where the evolution. Obviously, I was cutting out a few steps in the links in the chain, but just to see how it was going. And there's a lot of evolution that's gone on from those early days.
Yeah.
But like looking back at the album now, do you guys still sort of recognize yourselves in that
Oh
one?
yeah, there's like it's so interesting. There's like idiosyncrasies and habitual things and instinctual things that you can't. It's so weird. You can't you literally can't get rid of it. It's like genetic code, but it's the musical version. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that has stayed through the different genres that the band's taken is Al and I's voices have been the staple through that. Something you can hold on to and recognise. You hear it no matter what era it is and go, oh, it's Kingswood, because you can hear us harmonising, and
Of course.
that hasn't changed.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every album that you guys have done, and I guess for the purpose of illustration in this podcast, albums like After Hours, Close to Dawn, Juveniles, even Home, which was out last year, there is always so much, there's always so much going on, but you can always tell it's Kingswood. And I feel like, that's something you can just never get rid of, which is, I guess, but,
Yeah, and when we're
you're
not
ticking the
doing,
boxes, aren't you?
the Micro Wars tour, we're doing a set that comprises all of it. And we've managed to, and it was not a concern at some stage, but we were like, how do we put a set together that covers it all, that makes sense? And we've done that, and we're quite happy with how it flows, and we think that the set's really diverse and interesting.
So obviously there is the Microscopic Wars tour and everything, and that keeps you busy for a bit. But you guys are pretty much unstoppable, I've noticed. You guys don't stop touring. Like, just was it last year or when was the Home tour? Was it last year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that tour by itself, months on the road. How the hell are you guys not like, a household name in Australia yet? Because it seems like you've been everywhere. It seems like you're playing to the people, always going there, and every show seems to have a really good response. How is it that you guys aren't, a dinner table conversation every night?
I'm not sure people, if you said Kingswood at the table, they would...
Yeah, I think in some parts of Australia, I don't know.
They'd definitely talk about the car.
Yeah, I was going to say, they might be talking about the Kingswood.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. We don't really know what resonance we have in that sense around the dinner table. Yeah. Certainly when when you speak to people in the music industry, everyone knows who we are. Yeah, we were making up for lost time. COVID years, like so many industries and musicians sucked, and we were pretty edgy to get back out on the road, and we did 110 shows in 6 months, and now we tour in our bus, Peggy, and we love it. We just love playing to people anywhere around Australia or the world that wants to see us. We're not too proud to play in a small pub in the middle of nowhere,
I do also enjoy the fact you mentioned COVID there, because you guys you were lucky enough to actually have a couple of albums come out in that time. Like you had the Reveries, and then the Kingswood Christmas album, of course.
Yep.
But I think you guys also have that weird little, at least for me, the weird little honour of being like a bookending COVID for me. You were the first artist I saw as COVID started, when I saw you guys recording at your studio.
Yep.
And then the first band afterwards when you guys were playing at the Corner Hotel in a sit-down fashion.
That's cool.
So yeah, we closed and opened the Corner.
That's true.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's a really, it must be such a weird, like, a weird little sort of footnote in the band's history there, but obviously we aren't here to talk about COVID. I was obviously talking about Microscopic Wars and everything, but once this tour is over and everything, what are the plans for you guys? Like, we were chatting before this recording, there is some new music in the works.
Yep.
Is there anything you can, like, let slip publicly on that, or should we wait and see?
We're well into recording an album of absolute genuine mega hits.
So in 10 years' time, we'll be talking about that tour.
Ideally, yeah. Fergus not wrong. They are genuine mega hits.
We're loving the new direction and the new songs, and as soon as we finish this period of nostalgia, we'll start releasing the next phase of Kingswood, and go above and beyond. And we're going back to Europe next year, probably some time in America. But nothing's slowing down.
All right, well, let's get down to the portion of the podcast from which its namesake is derived. So Trusty Chords is built around the average chord. So folks who know theory know your standard chord is built around the 1, 3 and 5 structure. So I decided to take that very tenuous little link and make a podcast out of it. So what I do is I like to extrapolate that a bit and ask you guys one artist that you guys have always been able to rely on, 3 albums that you can always look to as important, and 5 songs you can always turn to. They don't need to be all by the same artist or anything like that, but this is one I like to use to get to know people's music taste a bit. So I don't know who I should begin with here. Al, do we want to go with yourself? Who was one artist that you could always...
the Beatles, 100%.
Didn't even have to finish the question. I like that.
3 albums.
If you like to keep thinking, I can go over to Ferg and get his one.
Yeah.
Well, you've taken the Beatles. That's okay.
I mean, it can also be the Beatles for yourself.
I think I'll go with closer to home. I think I'll go with Chisel.
Right.
I love that band. I think they're although they're very well respected, I think they're kind of underrated. I think they're a pretty amazing band for their time.
I mean, they are. I mean, they're pretty much like the pinnacle of like Aussie pub rock, aren't
they?
You can't sort of like talk about Aussie rock without thinking of...
Yeah, I think every member brings something, and it's just, it's a pretty magical ensemble.
So I mean, for myself, growing up north of Adelaide, I basically grew up in Cold Chisel country.
Yeah.
Years ago, I had the chance to interview Jimmy Barnes, and when I interviewed him, I was just sort of like, "Oh, mate, we're almost from the same town." He's just like, "Yeah, right."
Yeah.
Didn't even want to dwell on that. So I thought, well, that was my in, and that's my out. Next question.
Yeah.
And speaking of next question, we should go to 3 albums. So
man, that one's hard.
I can give you a couple.
Yeah, go for it.
I Love You, Honey Bear.
Father John Misty.
Yeah. Is certainly one of my favourites. The first Audio Slave album was a big deal for me. These are like the timestamps of my...
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is why I ask these questions. It really gets to know people's musical histories and how you can gauge them.
And maybe Magical Mystery Tour. lying down on the floor listening to that was a big deal. And also when Al and I were in New York, very hungover, someone put that on the speakers and we were lying in the top bunk and we just sang along. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was so funny. One of my great memories. I can't really explain it, but we were just singing along and pissing ourselves laughing, still wasted. And it was so funny. It's one of my favourite memories.
I mean, it's a brilliant album. I can only assume, being drunk in New York with your bandmates, it's underlines the experience, doesn't it?
Oh man, this is hard.
You can't think too much. You just got to throw them out there.
Probably Second Helping by Linacre.
Right.
Which is their second album. It has like a lot of very formative, like it sort of comprises a lot of how I think archetypal guitar like riffs are designed. It's got like Sweet Home Alabama on it, Needle and the Spoon, Working for the MCA, and just like all these amazing, very well designed guitar moments and like great playing, like Ed King's playing guitar and Gary Rossington and who's the third guitarist? They ended up getting this guy named Steve Gaines after Ed left, who was one of the guys that died in the plane crash. But all the guitarists they had through Skinner's sort of history has had huge influences on me. And then 1967, Hello, I'm Dolly Parton's first album, her debut, with like Dumb Blonde and all that stuff on it. Massive. I've probably listened to that album like I don't know how many times, thousands of times.
See, she's definitely an artist which I feel a lot of people don't really respect as much.
Dolly Parton?
Yeah. I mean...
In what sense?
In the sense of most people don't go deeper than things like Jolene and things like that,
I mean, Jolene, the album is incredible too.
Mean, it's definitely incredible. But it's one of those things where it's like you'll hear people talk about Dolly Parton as like a really great musician, and a lot of people won't sort of understand why. But you listen to albums like that one and you start realising, actually, she's
and not only
amazing.
That, she's so considered and a pioneer of so many things. Like, she didn't write Dumb Blonde, but she understood like how powerful it would be for her to put it on her first album, even though she was like one of Nashville's like premier writers at the time. She was writing hits for people at the time. So it takes some business nous to sort of make those concessions, and all through that, from 1967 through 1974, if you go through Dolly Parton's catalogue, it's like, it's all pretty incredible writing.
Yeah.
1974 being that when Jolene came out, I Will Always Love You and all those sorts of things. It goes a bit funny after that for me. The late 70s, early 80s stuff, I think there's so much influence from like culture at the time that sort of derails like Dolly's charm. Well, little bit.
I should say, just last week I was watching The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas.
And
I was surprised that she had I Will Always Love You in that one, because it had been written years earlier. It feels like an odd, I guess, incongruous little addition to the soundtrack in a sense.
I suppose it's weird because it's so linked to Porter Wagner, and it's so interesting what their relationship was and how he became completely disillusioned with her, and I think he sued her or all sorts of stuff, and he got really sick, and we've gone on a total tangent here.
Completely fine. Tangents are the name of the game.
They rekindled and their friendship, and also, so maybe it was in that period where she was like, oh fuck, Porter Wagner, this is like after me. Anyway, Hello, I'm Dolly, Second Helping, and this one's tricky too.
I've left out, whilst I was thinking, that my two most listened to albums. Although I've already mentioned three.
Well, that's fine. These can be honourable mentions.
The Johnny Cash Live at Folsom Prison.
Oh, yes.
And Ella Fitzgerald sings Cole Porter Songbook.
The Cole Porter Songbook's a big one.
It's so good.
Yeah. Is it I probably put I've got to put a Beatles in there. I've probably got to put Sgt. Pepper's in there. Probably.
Yeah. I mean, it's impossible to go past, isn't it?
Although Magical Mystery Tour has Fergus and I have like a quite an affinity, and it's like got a weird soft spot for us. And we also did it as Jeremy Dillon's podcast, My Favourite Album. We spoke about Magical Mystery Tour. I'd say, I mean, it's grossly inaccurate, but for the purposes of this conversation, those three albums.
Yeah. That's completely fine. I mean, this is the sort of question where I always like to give it to people just ahead of time.
Yeah.
Because if you think of it too much, then you can
You'll have different answers tomorrow.
Exactly right. Yeah. Because this is also the reason why I haven't answered that question, because knowing myself, I would spend hours upon hours, and I'd be trying to think, what'll make me sound good, as opposed to what do I actually.
Not even just that. It's like, what's influenced you at the time, and why I'm thinking of Skinner at the moment, because I'm doing a lot of sort of guitar layering, and from a production point of view, I always go back to like how like some of those decisions were so like important and critical to why those recordings are successful. And so that's obviously I'm thinking about Skinner at the moment. But if we were doing something else, a bit, who knows what album I'd be referencing at a certain point.
So then the last question I have for you is, I'd love to know the 5 songs you can always turn to, whether it be for comfort, for excitement, anything at all, your 5 trusty songs.
I can give you 2 classical ones immediately. It's not really a song, it's Beethoven's 5th Symphony, all 4 movements, not just the one that everyone knows.
It's all or nothing when it comes to Beethoven.
Yeah, you got to do the whole 4 movements. Actually, I have 3 classical ones, which is interestingly Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, and then Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu are the 3 things that I will read. Like, but they still elicit the feeling of how magnificent music is, and like how wondrous and how like bewildered and how brain melting its capability is, particularly with those 3 compositions.
See, I have always had a really weird relationship with classical music, in the sense that because I never sort of grew up on it or anything, and as a result, I always found it very hard to sort of grasp. Yeah. Because you have singles, for example, with albums and like contemporary artists. You don't have singles with like classical, so it's very hard to sort of grasp it and like find a way to get in.
I'll throw this at you though. I'd say Fantasy Impromptu is like Chopin's version of a single.
It's his hit.
It's like a bit of a banger.
Yeah,
he puts it. It's like a tantalizing piece, and it's like, whoa, but it's not. Whereas the symphonies are kind of albums in their own right.
Yeah, but it's they're always so. Phenomenal to just like really dive into and actually sort of
the reason they're inaccessible is because the level of composition and the understanding of musical intention for that period or that era is it's otherworldly to us.
It's a different language, right? It's just unless you learn the language.
Even learning it, like I've played that music my whole life, and I studied theory and to a high level, and I have a degree in music, and I like compositionally, man, you just like. I understand all the harmony, I understand the function of it, I understand how to do it, I know how to use it, I know how to access it, I know all about it. But just the depth of like how brilliant the compositions are. It's like going and seeing Da Vinci's stuff or Michelangelo's stuff or whatever. It's like, people can, like, we've got AI now, you can plug it in and it'll spit out like a beautiful picture, and it's not like you can't comprehend it. It's like, and even if like we have modern artists, like we have great modern artists, people still reveal, like you look at the roof of the Sistine Chapel and you're just like, what?
There's just a sort of innate quality to it that you can't really explain or analyze.
It's inexplicable,
because you can understand the theory, you can break it down, but the way it works.
Are there people that can paint like that? Yeah, sure. Are there composers that probably have the capacity to write something that complex? Of course. But it's not about the complexity isn't in the material. The complexity is in the humanity of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Super interesting stuff. So that's 3 for me, and then
I'll throw one in that's a bit later, but in a similar world. The Por una Cabreza. Who did that? That's our new walk-on song, which is great. I like that you put that on your headphones as you're walking down to the cafe and you feel like you're at the opening of a movie. It just takes you in another world.
I should also say I find it really almost somewhat jarring to be looking at yourselves, like to look at you guys. You don't seem like the classical music types, but it's so wonderful to actually hear a diverse music taste.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? It's wonderful.
Oh, that's lovely. Thanks, Sarah.
That's what I'm here for. I'm all about the.
So my next one's Wu-Tang Clan.
I mean, I loved.
To be fair, Wu-Tang has some great songs. I mean,
we love
actually.
that.
I mean, I'll throw it in there. Bound, Kanye. Is it called Bound 2?
Bound 2, yeah.
Fuck, it's so sick.
Yeah.
I did that the other day. I was under the pressure to put on a good song, you know, like when everyone is like, so put something on, and I just went to that. Can't go wrong.
To be fair, that entire album is actually...
Graduation. I don't know if it's on Graduation, but
it's on Yeezus, that one.
Yeezus, that's right, but Graduation is amazing.
The production level he always employed is... I think with that one, he had Daft Punk involved in the production as well.
Yeah,
and
crazy.
you're just up in the ante all the time, even though, you know, Kanye is sort of a bit of a...
How wacky can we go with more songs?
Oh, you can't go wrong with like a No One Knows every once in a while at like full tilt.
Yeah.
I've gone 3 classical songs and fucking Queens of the Stone Age now. I've got to do a blues number. It's such a huge influence on my life. What would it be?
First song I ever learned on guitar was Boom Boom.
Johnny Lee?
But I don't listen to it very much, but...
It's more like you're talking about songs you can put on and it takes you to that place, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Live in Africa, Sweet 16. B.B. King. Pretty wild experience. Being a huge... There's a portion of one of his breaks between vocals that literally bonded CT and I. Which is a mutual friend. But like we bonded over the same lick.
Yeah, right.
Of this one recording. And we're like, there's this lick he does after this lyric. And I'm like,
I both knew what you're talking about, yeah.
And he's like, no, you don't. I'm like, I bet you I do. Yeah. Brothers in Korea, baby. And we were like, he was like, yes, that's the one.
What about the soft note in Gravity? I feel like we've bonded over it.
Yeah, oh, Mayer's up there. Yeah. Mayer's funny, like, fuck, he annoys me, his fucking voice and...
Yeah. So much to love about him, but his voice is annoying.
But but his voice is kind of good. I don't know. It's a weird one. It was definitely had an ear in the Kingswood tour there. It always makes me think of Jimmy. Continuum always makes me think of Jimmy Price.
Cousin Jimmy, great man.
Thank you for the context.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all good. So I think, is that 5 songs for yourself?
Yeah.
Al? So I think we've got 3 more with songs. You.
3 more?
Yeah.
Oh my god. Can they be off some of the albums that I've mentioned?
They can be anything you like.
The night Josh Tillman came to our apartment, which is a Father John Misty song.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you're telling me a story for a second or no, but I'm aware of the song. But
I love it. He's just ripping on this person in the most beautiful way. He's just absolutely tearing it to shreds, but in this like really, it's very, anyway, you have to listen to it. 2 more songs. What's something that's jumped out lately? Al, remind me if there's something you can remember.
Surely there's a Chisel song for you in there.
Oh, of course. Flame Trees is huge. Yep. Maybe I can get an Aerosmith in there. I haven't mentioned Aerosmith. They've been pretty influential to me.
Aerosmith or Extreme? Aerosmith over Extreme.
Aerosmith. Maybe Tell Me What It Takes to Let You Go. What It Takes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's a good choice.
Or Crazy. Tyler just being Tyler.
It's so the epitome of...
The songs would start and he'd start like sort of almost rapping at the start of them.
Yeah. It's the epitome.
You know you're driving up the wall where you make good of all those nasty tricks you pull while the band's like playing behind him. It's crazy. He's awesome.
Amazing. Well, I think that's 5 each year.
Yeah.
I think so.
Awesome. Well, I should say, Alex Laska and Fergus Linacre, thank you very much for joining the Trusty Chords podcast.
Thanks for having us, Tyler. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Trusty Chords. If you enjoyed this episode, then I'd really appreciate it if you could take some time to like, follow, share, and review this podcast on your preferred platform of choice. It's always helping this podcast cut through the noise of the myriad other podcasts out there in the world. If you're eager to follow along on social media, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. I'm also on Twitter at Trusty Chords Pod, also all one word, but I might be ending my Twitter presence soon because I can't in all good conscience continue to support it. There's also a blog for this podcast on my own website, which is tylerjenke.com. That's TYLERJENKE/Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. That's where you can find and read through entries on each episode each week and a list of all the artists, albums, and 5 songs chosen by guests each week, along with the accompanying playlist too. I will apologise to Alex Laska. I couldn't quite put the entirety of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony or Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in the playlist due to their immense lengths, so we've just got the first movement of each. You can also find a link to the Buy Me a Coffee platform on my website, where you can throw me a few dollars to keep this podcast running if you feel so inclined. As usual, thanks to everyone who continues to listen, message, or just support this podcast in any way. I'm forever grateful to hear from you all each and every week. Lastly, I need to thank Alex Laska and Fergus Linacre for spending time with me this week for the podcast. I've interviewed them numerous times over the years, and their hospitality and candour is always appreciated. But once again, thank you kindly for listening, and I hope to see you all again next week as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.